All right. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing?
Oh, doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
So, you got a book out called When, and I see a couple of copies floating around behind you. Was this
Yes.
your first book?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, it's a 15-year journey really to get this thing actually published. I was working for a company back in the mid 2000s where I was just learning a lot, and the company was very successful. And I just had this idea about sharing thoughts about what it took for that company to be successful and things that I learned, and just failed miserably with that attempt. And then over the next 15 years, I tried a variety of different ways, maybe another eight or nine, 10 failed attempts, because I just had something I wanted to say. I learned so much. I had so many mentors along the way that I just thought I could maybe help some people. And then in early 2020, I had three crossroads kind of come together that said, let's take another shot at this. One was I had a friend of mine write and publish a book, and I was just inspired by what he did and how he did it. And after talking to him, I said, I think I can do this. So it was great motivation. And then obviously in early 2020, COVID hit, and some business opportunities that I had going on at the time dried up. And so I had a little bit more time on my hand. And then the final thing was most important. I was having a conversation with my son, who was in his first job after college, and he was experiencing some challenges, as many people do in their first job. And he told me what was going on. And I said to him what I had said many times in our life. I said, let me tell you a story. So I told him a story about a situation I had at my first job after college. And when I was done telling him the story, he said, Dad, boy, that is really eerily similar to what I'm going through. And after we finished the conversation, I said, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. So what I decided was, instead of the traditional way I was failing at writing the book, which was, a story on leadership or a chapter on, personal development or something like that, I said, I'm going to write a book of stories with the mindset of how can I help my son as he embarks on his career, 35, 40, 45-year career. He was 22 years old at the time. And I said, I'm going to write a book of stories to help him navigate his life and his career. And then hopefully in so doing, I can inspire other people and motivate other people by publishing the book. So after 10 failed attempts, I got also a little blessing from above. All these notes that I had, these spirits notes that I couldn't even get a first draft done. I went and had in about a week time period, I had a 100-page outline of about 330 stories I could write. And then over the next 4 months, I worked basically full time because I had the time, and ended up writing about 370 stories. About 270 are in the actual book. So it was really a long journey to get there. But this inspiration of the ability to write stories rather than chapters, and wanting to really help my son, and as he navigates his life. And the reason the book is titled When, and the subtitle is Things I Wish I Knew When I Was Starting Out, Starting Over, and Trying to Get Ahead. When represents when these stories took place in my life. So the first chapter is a bunch of stories about what I wish I knew when I was going to start my first job. And then the next chapter is, 25, 30 stories about what happened when I did go into my first job, and things I wish I knew then, and so on, all the way through the rest of my career, really to date. So it was just a long journey, but it was really a desire to try to help people, and learn from people that I had learned from, kind of mentoring remotely, to be able to share some things that I wish I knew back then, and maybe this will help other people as they navigate their life and their careers.
You had mentioned 10 failed attempts. Was this
Yes.
10 failed attempts at starting your own businesses, or 10 failed attempts at working in a corporate environment for somebody else?
Actually, it was 10 failed attempts of trying to write the book.
Oh,
Um,
I see.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. No, so it was, At the time when I first started, I was working at a company called Michael's Arts and Crafts Stores. I was one of their senior executives, and we were about to get transitioned into a private equity firm. But the bottom line is I just knew a lot then, and I felt I could share this with people. But I just couldn't find what I call the secret sauce. So it was these attempts to go back and say, okay, now I'm going to try to write the book again and again, or I'm going to try this angle or try that angle. So it was really the 10 failed attempts of trying to get the book written, what happened over the last 10 or 15 years.
Give us one example of what you wish you knew.
So I'll get one of the stories in the book was when I first went and did my very first interview. I had never interviewed before for real jobs. Most of my jobs when I was a teenager were because of family friends of my parents or something like that. So I worked in a hardware store, or I worked at a lumber company that my dad worked at. So when I was graduated from college, I was the first one in my family of all cousins and whatever to graduate. So to go into a corporate job rather than into a blue collar job, because all my family were blue collar workers. So they helped me as much as they could, but it was a brand new experience for me. And one of the interviews I went on was for it was a department store. I lived back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time. And when we were interviewing, it was was kind of a group interview setting, and then they separated you, and then they brought you back for lunch. And one of the things they did at lunch is, and at this time you had to be dressed up in suit and ties, and the ladies had to be dressed up in their best business suits at the time. This was 1983. And they sat us down at a kind of a picnic table type format, and they served us fried chicken, coleslaw, a pickle, and they gave us little plastic forks and knives. And I thought it was really strange. Here we are all dressed up, and they gave us, chicken to eat. It was just kind of strange. So I didn't really want to go work for them because I already had 2 other job offers, but I was kind of going through the process just to learn. So when I was eating, it was the forks just couldn't get through the toughness of the skin of the fried chicken. So I was like, forget it. So I just picked up the chicken and started eating it with my hands until I could kind of break through the crust, so then I could actually use the fork and knife. And I remember going home and telling my parents I just blew the interview because nobody's going to want somebody that just, eats like that. Little and I know, about a week later, their personnel, somebody from their personnel department called me, and they wanted to actually offer me a job. And I actually asked her, I said, well, what about me eating, with my hands? And she said, well, actually, we like that about you because, I was going in to be a merchant at the time, to be a buyer in a department store. And they wanted people to look differently. They wanted to have more of an idea of how do you can express yourself, whether you're buying clothing or buying something else, for people obviously to come in your department store to buy. So they were looking for these little tweaks. Again, and I didn't know that. So what I didn't know going into the interview is how much they watch all these other things besides just, the traditional questions of what your strengths and weaknesses, or what do you want to do with your career or something like that, coming out of college. They watched everything. And that is something that I did not know then, but every interview after that, I was very conscientious of what people were watching. Even when I was in a waiting room, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing something that could possibly be something that, the psychological traits of what they want to hire look at. And over time, if you look at a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations, a lot of different industries, what they look at sometimes is not your resume, it's other things. And so that was a huge lesson for me at 22 years old. And in fact, I used it when I became an executive and I started interviewing people. I started to look at these other things that were important to me and whether they could fit into the organization. So that's one of the stories in the book. The title is They Were Watching Me Eat.
Well, you have to wonder if the chicken was intentional.
I don't know. They might have, or it was just a bad buy from Kentucky Fried Chicken or something. I don't know, but
well, it just seems
could have been.
It just seems like such a strange food to serve at a corporate lunch, and a very messy food and a very kind of inappropriate food. Usually, I've been to those lunches too, and it's usually The mini lunch is usually sandwiches that are already prepackaged,
Yeah,
potato chips, a chocolate chip cookie, and an assortment of soft drinks.
right,
Something you can eat very neatly
right.
without getting it all over you. I mean, that's like serving fish to people, you know?
Well, that's why I thought it was just unusual. And so, like I said, I didn't, because I had this kind of carefree attitude, because I had a couple already ready to go, some job offers. I was like, forget it. I'm just eating. I'm hungry. It was a tough day. Obviously these days are very strenuous, especially when you can look around the room and there's your competition right there, because these were group interviews that they did. But again, it was a lesson learned. And actually, the kind of the whole story comes around full circle is when I was writing these stories. I had my son read them all, because he's obviously one of the target audiences of this, being kind of the 20 to 35-year-old areas where I'm kind of targeting this book. He went out and did some interviews. And he said, Dad, I was very conscientious because of what they were asking me. And when they had us sitting in the room, and some people were like complaining about what was going on, I was thinking, well, is there a microphone around here? So it helped him go through some interviews. And then he actually got a position, and, he asked some questions like, were you watching us? And like, oh yeah, we were watching you. We were watching you. So, it's just the type of things you don't know when you're young. And some people I know when they're 35, 40 years old interview, and they don't realize all the things that people are looking at. So that's one of, a couple hundred stories like that are in the book, of things that people just might not know. I didn't know, that can help you as you, like I said, navigate your life and your career.
Well, I bet your son is your biggest fan and potentially could be your biggest critic. Did you have him read it, proof it before you put it out?
Absolutely. He read every story, because what I did is I changed my whole life from a standpoint of when I worked, because I needed it absolutely quiet, and I don't have like some log cabin that you hear some authors go to. So I work third shift. I would type from like 10 o'clock at night to about 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was just basically like a third shift worker. And then I would do research during the day, sleep a little bit, whatever. But when I would finish 8 or 9, 10 stories, I would give them to Zach, and I'd say, please read these. And then I would wait for him to walk down the hallway and, say, Dad, this is awesome, or this is great. And then a couple of them was like, this is just not very good. So he was instrumental in helping me make sure that my stories, were right on, that they were truly lessons that you could learn. And then, so all the first 370 stories I wrote, he absolutely was critical in helping me make sure that I was hitting the target audience that I wanted to hit. And the ability, plus he's a good writer. So he's a much better editor and writer than I am. And so he was able to help me take, certain points and say, Dad, I think you can make that point clear this way or this way. So very critical. And then he helped me with the very first edit. And then actually I hired a professional editor. But yeah, he was very critical in helping me. And the most important was not to cheerlead me, which obviously as a son you will do for your dad, but his ability to critique me appropriately, to help me say, okay, I got to reevaluate either that story or these bunch of stories. They're not hitting home. So then I'd have to go back and redo them. So he was very, very critical. And in the introduction to the book, is really this kind of interaction with me and Zachary, that if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have been able to really be here with you today or have that book over my shoulder completed, because he was instrumental in so many ways.
Last question, and then we got to wrap it up. Did you, since this is your first book, did you self-publish it, or did you?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay.
I've read so much about the whole publishing process, and after getting to the point where I had something that I thought was pretty good, and I had other people read it and give me some compliments on it. I just didn't have the energy to not only complete the editing and the writing process and then have to go out and try to sell it to some people that might like it or might tell me, like in 2 years we can publish it because your type of book will fit on a schedule. So I had a really wonderful editor who does this, and I was fortunate enough to have a few dollars in the bank to be able to invest in this, and thankfully my wife agreed. But I just felt the message was, needed to be out there. So I did self-publish, and I'm glad. I learned a lot. Didn't know really much about this whole process. I mean, you just pick up a book and you have no idea about, what it takes to write it and edit it, and even the font on the colors on the front of the book and everything. So it was a great learning process, but I decided to do it myself. I'm really glad I did, because now I own everything. I own the rights. I own everything to it. So as it's done, pretty well out there in the marketplace, and hopefully, based on people seeing this, maybe a few more sales. But I just felt that I wanted to get it out there quicker than the normal process probably would have been able me to do that.
Well, my guest is Jeff Wellen. The book is called When. It is out and available now on Amazon, I assume.
Yes, and you can go to jeffwellen.com, and you can see other things that I do there as well. And there's a link that you can click on to go purchase the book.
Okay, great. Well, Jeff, thanks for coming on the show and sharing your story, and best of luck with the book. I hope it does well.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I appreciate what you're doing for me and for other authors to get their story out.